Welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at something that I'm sure everyone thinks about at some point, successful aging. What does it really mean to age well? And more importantly, can we actually do anything to make it happen?
Well, it's a question that's fascinated researchers for decades now. And luckily for us, we've got a whole stack of fascinating sources to help us sort through it. We'll be checking out some academic articles that really get into the nuts and bolts of defining successful aging. We'll explore some psychological interventions that have been used with older adults and also look into things that help or, hinder how people adjust to retirement. We'll even touch on how important cognitive and physical engagement are for aging well.
Sounds like we've got our work cut out for us. But all right, let's get into it. So before we even talk about how we probably need to define what we're even talking about here. I think one of the articles, we've got a 1997 article by Rowe and Kahn, really lays it out well. They define successful aging as having three main parts: avoiding disease, maintaining high function physically and cognitively, and this is a big one, staying actively engaged with life.
And I think the important thing about their definition is that they emphasize how these parts are kind of hierarchical. It's not just about being disease-free. It's about being disease-free, A&D maintaining your abilities, A&D staying actively involved in the world. You got to have all three.
So it's not just about racking up birthdays. It's about living a long, healthy, and fulfilling life, ticking all the boxes.
Exactly. Their definition really pushes back against this outdated idea that aging automatically equals decline. There's actually huge potential for aging to be a positive thing. And, that's what we're really exploring today.
Okay, so that brings us to the big question. What actually influences whether or not someone achieves this successful aging? And I think we get some really interesting clues from the Swedish adoption twin study of aging, or SATSA for short.
Yeah. SATSA, the findings from that study really challenge some common assumptions about aging. We often think about genetics playing this huge role. But what they found is that while genes definitely do influence things like blood pressure and cholesterol, that influence actually lessens as we age.
Wait, so you're saying our genes become less important as we get older? This is where it gets really interesting.
Well, it's not quite that simple. While the influence of genetics goes down, the impact of our lifestyle choices increases. So in a way, we actually get more control over our health as we age.
I love that. It's almost like our genes give us this basic blueprint, but then as we get older, we get to pick up the paintbrush and decide what the final masterpiece is going to look like.
I love that analogy. But it's not even just those big, lifestyle choices that we make. One of our sources, a 2011 review by Wang and colleagues, highlighted the concept of intra-individual variability. Basically, it's talking about how much our physical and cognitive performance fluctuates.
Okay, but why is that fluctuation such a big deal? Does it really impact things that much?
The really interesting thing is that studies are showing these fluctuations, especially in physical performance, can actually be a better predictor of mortality than a person's average performance level. It all boils down to our declining physiological reserves as we get older.
Hold on. So you're saying that someone who's consistently active but has, a couple off days might actually be at a greater risk than someone who's just moderately active every single day. That's kind of mind-blowing.
It does go against how we normally think about fitness, right? But it shows how important it is to be both resilient and consistent with our health habits. It's all about keeping those reserves topped up so we can bounce back from, whatever challenges life throws our way.
So consistency is key. All right, so we've talked about how our lifestyle choices play a big role. Now let's get into something that I know a lot of people worry about: cognitive function. Is memory decline just an inevitable part of getting older?
It's a big one, and understandably so. But actually, there's some good news here. Research from the MacArthur Foundation's Successful Aging Studies is actually challenging that idea that memory decline is inevitable. They found that things like education, continuing to engage in activities that are intellectually stimulating, and even just our beliefs about our own abilities.
You mean whether or not we believe that we can learn new things as we get older?
Exactly. That sense of self-efficacy. All of these play a big role in whether we maintain good cognitive function as we age.
So it's not about, suddenly becoming a crossword puzzle master overnight. It's more about fostering that love of learning throughout your whole life. And I guess believing in yourself too.
Absolutely. And here's something even more encouraging. There are studies showing that even small interventions like practicing your reasoning skills can actually improve cognitive function in older adults.
Wow, really? I mean, I knew the brain was adaptable, but that's amazing. It really seems like we're never too old to, sharpen our mental tools.
Exactly. This ties back to the idea of having cognitive reserve. It's kind of like building up a mental savings account throughout life. The more you deposit, the more you'll have to draw on later.
Okay, that's such a good analogy. So we've covered staying mentally sharp. Now let's shift gears and talk about the physical side of things. How crucial is physical function to successful aging, and what are some of the key things that come into play?
Well, our ability to move freely and do the things we enjoy is really essential for quality of life at any age. The MacArthur studies found that maintaining a healthy weight, keeping your blood pressure under control, and engaging in both moderate and strenuous physical activity.
So everything from like leisurely walks to hitting the gym, it all counts.
Exactly. All of these things were strong predictors of how well people maintained their physical performance as they aged.
I think this is where some people get intimidated, thinking they have to, train for a marathon or something to actually benefit. But one of the sources we looked at actually highlighted something really encouraging. Just doing moderate activity, like going for regular walks, can actually be just as beneficial for older adults as more intense exercise.
You got it. It's about finding ways to stay active that you actually enjoy and that you can fit into your life. And that brings us to another really important piece of the puzzle: social engagement and productivity.
And this is where we push back against that old stereotype about, disengagement in later life, right?
Yeah.
It's about staying connected, contributing, finding purpose.
You got it. Both the MacArthur study and the Americans Changing Lives study found that things like social support and being engaged in productive activities.
And productive activities doesn't just mean like having a job, right? It's a broader definition than that.
Absolutely. Think things like volunteering or caregiving or even creative pursuits.
Yeah.
Anything that creates value for your community. It's about using your skills and passions to make a difference in whatever way feels right for you.
I'm guessing that both emotional support, that feeling of, being loved and cared for, and the instrumental support, the more practical help with day-to-day tasks are both important here.
They are, absolutely. But what's interesting is that the kind of support we need can actually change depending on what's going on in our lives. Sometimes we need someone to, just listen and be there for us emotionally. And other times we need someone to help us, figure out a tricky situation or solve a problem.
So it's about having a diverse and supportive network of people we can rely on in different ways. Not just, the same people all the time, but knowing who to turn to when certain things come up.
Precisely. And when you combine that strong network with, a sense of purpose and making a contribution, you end up with this really powerful combination for well-being in later life. Now, this brings us to an interesting point about how we actually define productive activity, because it's not always what we think. We often fall back on measuring productivity through, paid work, the kind that gets counted in GDP. But what about all those unpaid activities that contribute so much value?
Exactly. Things like volunteering and caregiving or mentoring younger generations, those are all super valuable, even if they're not officially recognized or measured.
Exactly. And the Americans Changing Lives study really pushed back against that narrow definition of productivity. They found that most older adults are making productive contributions, just not always in ways that show up in the official statistics.
That makes a lot of sense. So we've got this broader, more inclusive view of what productive can actually look like in later life. But what actually helps people stay engaged in those activities? Is it just a matter of motivation, or are there other things going on?
Well, it's never that simple, is it? Both the ACL and MacArthur studies actually pointed to three main predictors of whether someone stayed productive. Functional capacity education and that sense of self-efficacy we talked about before.
Okay, break that down for me. How does functional capacity tie into all this?
Think of it this way. If you're dealing with physical limitations or cognitive decline, it's going to be harder to participate in activities, whether it's paid work or volunteering, or even just keeping up with your hobbies.
Right, that makes total sense. So maintaining our physical and cognitive health is a prerequisite for staying engaged in the things that give us purpose.
Exactly. And then you've got education. We know that people with higher levels of education tend to be more engaged in productive activities throughout their lives.
That's interesting. Why do you think that is? Is it just because education opens up more opportunities, or is there something deeper going on there?
It's probably a mix of things. Education can definitely lead to better job prospects and more income, but it also seems to encourage this mindset of lifelong learning and engagement. It gives people the skills and the confidence to try new things and make meaningful contributions.
So it's not just about the knowledge you gain, but the habits of mind that you develop through education. That's really insightful. And of course, we can't forget about self-efficacy. That belief in our own abilities seems to be a big theme when we talk about successful aging.
Absolutely. And the ACL study found that people with a strong sense of self-efficacy were much more likely to be involved in productive activities, while those who felt more vulnerable or had more of a fatalistic outlook were less likely to be involved. It really comes down to feeling like you can actually make a difference.
So it's not just about having the ability to do something, but actually believing you can do it. That confidence seems crucial for staying active and engaged throughout life. But, let's be real for a second. Even people who are aging successfully are going to run into challenges and setbacks. Life throws everyone a curveball at some point, right?
That's so true. It's not about avoiding stress or difficulty altogether. It's more about how you respond to those inevitable bumps in the road. How do you cope when things get tough?
Right. The 1997 Rowan Kahn article we talked about earlier really emphasized the importance of resilience in dealing with stress. And older adults may have to deal with both chronic stress, like those everyday hassles, and more acute stresses, like serious illness or losing a loved one.
Absolutely, and those events can really shake things up both physically and emotionally. So how do we cultivate that resilience to navigate those difficult times?
Yeah.
What can we do to sort of prepare ourselves?
I think that's where all those factors we've been talking about come in. Maintaining our physical and cognitive health gives us a stronger foundation to deal with stress. Having a good social support network can help protect us from isolation and despair.
Exactly. It's like having this whole toolkit of resources you can draw on when things get rough.
Ugh.
And just knowing you have those resources can really boost your confidence and help you stay positive, even in the face of adversity.
So it's really about approaching aging proactively rather than passively, recognizing that you still have agency, even as your body and circumstances change. You're not just a passenger.
That's a great way to put it. And one of the best ways we can exercise that agency is by pushing back against those negative stereotypes about aging. The ones that equate getting older with decline and dependency and disengagement.
Oh, yeah, those stereotypes are so limiting. And unfortunately, they're everywhere.
Exactly. And when we buy into those stereotypes, we end up limiting our own possibilities. We start to believe that certain things are off limits for older adults, whether it's trying new activities or pursuing passions or contributing to society.
So part of successful aging is actually about rejecting those limits and redefining what it means to be an older adult in today's world. It's about rewriting the script.
I love that. And I think there's a real opportunity here for intergenerational dialogue and learning. We need to break down those age-based silos.
Totally, because younger generations can learn so much from the wisdom and experience of older adults. And at the same time, older adults can benefit from the energy and fresh perspectives that younger people bring to the table. It's a two-way street.
Absolutely. When we break down those age-based barriers, we create a richer and more vibrant and more inclusive society for everybody. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about something that's often seen as a big turning point in later life: retirement.
Retirement. It's so often portrayed as this either-or situation. You're either, sipping margaritas on the beach somewhere, or you're struggling with a loss of identity and purpose. But I think our sources suggest that the reality of retirement is a lot more nuanced than that.
It definitely is. It's rarely that black and white. The Wang et review we mentioned earlier actually looked at different theories about how people adjust to retirement. Some theories, like role theory, really highlight the challenges that can come with losing the work role and those social connections that go with it.
And I can imagine that for people who really identify with their careers, that transition can be incredibly difficult. It's like a part of them is missing. So much of who we are is tied up in what we do, how we spend our days.
That's right. And that's where it becomes so important to cultivate other roles and sources of identity outside of work. Things like family, community involvement, hobbies, volunteer work, those can all provide a sense of purpose and fulfillment that goes beyond just your job.
It's like having a more well-rounded life, so that when one role changes or ends, you have other sources of meaning to fall back on. You're not putting all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. Then you've got continuity theory, which suggests that people generally tend to maintain their values and habits and lifestyles even after they retire. So if someone was really active and socially engaged while they were working, they're more likely to stay that way in retirement too. There's a kind of through line.
That makes sense. It's about carrying those good habits and mindsets into this new phase of life. What about those stage theories of retirement? Do they offer any insights into how this whole adjustment process usually works?
They do. Stage theories say that people typically go through these predictable phases of adjustment. There's often this honeymoon phase where people are excited about having all this newfound freedom, but then that's often followed by a period of disenchantment. And eventually, most people reach a more stable and satisfying stage where they've kind of reoriented themselves to this new way of life.
So it's not always a straightforward path, but there are some common patterns that a lot of people seem to experience. And I imagine that how easy or difficult it is to go through those stages really depends on individual circumstances and the resources people have available to them.
Absolutely. And that's where the life course perspective comes in. It emphasizes that these retirement transitions are embedded in a bigger context. They're shaped by individual attributes, personal history, and social circumstances. It's a very holistic view.
So there's no magic formula for successful retirement adjustment. It's about understanding the unique set of factors that influence each person's experience and how all those pieces fit together.
Exactly. And last but not least, you have the resource perspective, which actually ties back to what we were saying earlier about successful aging in general. It suggests that how well someone adjusts to retirement depends a lot on the resources they have available to them.
You mean things like physical and cognitive health, financial security, social support?
All of that. Plus, less tangible resources like self-efficacy, coping skills, and access to things like leisure activities and community support.
So it's really about having a diverse toolkit to draw on as you navigate the challenges and opportunities of retirement. And the more resources you have, the smoother that transition is likely to be.
That's the idea. And what's interesting is that this dynamic perspective recognizes that retirement adjustment is a process that unfolds over time. It's not a one-time event. It's an ongoing journey with its own ups and downs.
So it's not about reaching some final destination of retirement bliss. It's more about adapting to changing circumstances and finding new sources of meaning and fulfillment as you move through this stage of life, which is probably good advice for life in general, wouldn't you say?
I think that's a brilliant point. It really applies to so much more than just retirement. It's about embracing change and finding joy in the journey wherever it takes you.
And speaking of embracing the journey, wow, it feels like we've covered a lot of ground today exploring this whole concept of successful aging. It's definitely not just about luck or good genes or anything.
Definitely not. We've really uncovered so many different pieces that contribute to aging. Well, some things we can control, some we can't. But it's that combination that makes it so interesting, you know?
We can't go back in time and change our genetic makeup, but we can definitely make choices that put us in a better position to age in a healthy way. It's not just something that happens to us.
Right. Think back to that SATSA study. Our genes might be a big factor when we're younger, but their influence really does decrease as we get older, which means we probably have more control over our health than we realize.
It's a really empowering idea. We're not just passengers. We can actually
Sure.
take the wheel.
Absolutely. And, taking the wheel means taking this kind of holistic approach. We've seen how important it is to take care of our physical health, stay mentally sharp, keep those social connections strong, and cultivate that sense of purpose. All of those things work together to create a good foundation for well-being as we age.
I keep thinking about those findings on intra-individual variability, too. It's a good reminder that being consistent with our healthy habits really does matter. It's about building up those reserves so we can bounce back from challenges, you know?
Yeah, like making regular deposits into your resilience bank account.
Exactly. And when it comes to staying mentally sharp, the message is pretty clear. Use it or lose it. Learning new things, keeping our minds active, and believing in ourselves and our ability to grow. Those are all key to keeping our mental muscles strong.
And it's never too late to start. You can always pick up a new hobby or learn something new. Our brains are amazing like that.
And remember that cognitive savings account analogy. The more we put in throughout our lives, the more we'll have to draw on later. Even small things can make a difference.
And, speaking of small things, let's not forget about how powerful social connections are. Staying connected to others, being involved in our communities, nurturing those close relationships. Those are all so important for a fulfilling life at any age.
You know what strikes me is that successful aging isn't about trying to have this perfect problem-free life. Life has its ups and downs for everyone, no matter how old you are. It's really about how you deal with those challenges that matters most.
And that's where resilience is so important. It's about having the tools and the support you need to navigate those tough times and come out the other side stronger. Good physical health, a supportive network of people, a healthy dose of self-belief, those are all really important pieces of the puzzle.
So as we wrap up our deep dive today, I'm feeling really optimistic. Aging doesn't have to be about decline and, just fading away. It can be a time of growth and connection and purpose.
I agree. It's about challenging those outdated ideas about aging and embracing all the possibilities that come with this stage of life. It's about writing your own story.
Absolutely. Now, here's something to think about as you go about your day. We've learned about so many different things that contribute to successful aging. Knowing what you know now, what steps can you take starting today to create a life that sets you up for aging well? It's a question worth thinking about no matter where you are in life.
I agree. It's never too early to start.
And remember, this is just the beginning of our exploration. We'll definitely be diving into more specific areas and uncovering more insights about aging in future episodes.
So stay tuned for more inspiration and tips on living your best life at every age.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive today. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep exploring.